You can have mine too, but you may not ask for them. That's called that's called pleading for attention. Right. Now this is economics, so it's going to be dull. Okay, get used to that. We'll have to wait until you're happy to sit down. Standing in front of the projector is not the best.
Sorry.
Not at all. I like engaging with the audience. So yes, it's economics and therefore dull, and I promise you it will be. But by the end of it, I want to send you out of here with a passion in you, seriously, a fighting spirit. The effect I want to achieve, and this is a tall ask, is John Knox famously gave a sermon in the town kirk in St Andrews, where we spent a wonderful year as a family, and so fired up the congregation that they stormed out of the church, went down to the bishop's palace. This is back in the sort of Catholic days. Found the bishop in bed with his mistress, as what you did. The next part's not quite so funny, and they hung him out the window. And then proceeded to tear down, over the next few generations, most of a magnificent cathedral. St Andrews is now a wonderful town of elegant stone buildings, but it was a cathedral once, not anymore. So I want to send you out with that kind of passion before I'm finished. Ready? But first, the dull stuff. So what I want to do is, I'm grateful for the opportunity of talking with you guys. And look, congratulations for being here on such a warm day. It's so good of you. I'm grateful for the opportunity of just taking the time to think through why economics has such a hard time, or let me be a bit more precise, why market-based economics has such a hard time with climate change. So let's start with some of the phenomena that by now you're well aware, and I'm sure you were before, that characterize climate change as a problem. It affects the whole planet. It's got long lags. This is going to be with us for centuries. I wasn't sure how to put this into sensible English, but basically the idea is that the way in which societies work and the way in which the planet may work may be really quite different from the way it is now. If we get some of the serious problems going in terms of ocean acidification, what that's going to do to fish stocks, what that's going to do to people's food options, can be really quite radically different from what it is now. A proposition here two propositions really at the same time from complexity systems, which is how I got into thinking about the problems of the climate, namely that this emerging world that we are moving towards, greater or lesser pace, we may let us all hope that we don't create very large-scale change, but if we do, complexity systems say that it's going to be a world that we simply cannot predict from what we know now. Okay, it's going to be so different that I could fill up all of your supercomputers with everything that we possibly know about how the world works, and it would not help you understand the new rules of the game. And finally, where those new rules emerge from is bottom-up in complex systems. Okay. Now, each of these presents problems for economics. As I told you when we first met, my professional training is in economics. It certainly isn't in physics, which is Bob Lloyd's bit, but we got along, we managed. So externalities, and I'll explain each of these words when we get to them. Externalities is a real problem with large-scale planetary problems. The long lags, discount rate. What discount rate do we use? Just maybe language you don't know about, but you will do in 10 minutes' time. New structures being radically different from what we know. This makes life very difficult for people that like to build large economic models of economic behavior. And if we are moving towards a world in which the new system is unknowable from the present, you immediately have to let go of one of the assumptions that is required for any market-based system that approximates even perfect competition, namely information. You can't have anything that looks like a competitive market with imperfect information. And boy, we don't know much about how the new world is going to look. And finally, if we take the proposition that these new orders will emerge bottom-up, these are problems that economists have been aware of and thought about for a long time. They're known, or used to be known back in the day, as infant industry arguments, and we're running into this now. Wind power, for example, has had significant support, certainly within Germany, because everybody understood it would take time to build up the volume and the scale of operation to get costs down and to be competitive with oil. R&D is somewhat similar. With research, you never know what you're going to get. There are many people with research careers in the room. No, this is a different question, but one of these days we should all ask ourselves whether we actually got the answer to the question we thought we were asking when we started. So let's go through each of these at a time. The global scale of climate change and the problem of externalities. The way an economist would think about this is that economic activities, you could take a company or a university, they have consequences which are more or less planned. They sell stuff, they employ people, and they more or less get the kind of results that they're looking for, revenues, wages, and profits. But any activity can have a range of different outcomes. So these kind of, let's call them economic activities, can also produce effects and behaviors which are unintended. And crucially, from the point of view of an economic analysis, they are not priced. And CO2 has to be the ultimate externality. I've got a slide in just a minute to show you what kind of price we put on carbon. This is one of the more exciting slides I have. I don't have many, so I'm looking forward to that one. I want to see the effect when we get to it. Anyway, so CO2, of course, externalities don't have to be negative like CO2, they can be positive. Your employees learn a whole bunch of stuff while they're working for you, and they walk away with that benefit. That's an externality. You can't take it off them. You can't charge them for it. So you've got to think of economic activity as producing a whole range of bits and pieces of outcomes, only some of which are actually captured by the economic transaction itself, that have dollars attached to them. The tragedy of the commons is one of the ways in which externalities emerge. Where you've got multiple economic agents with access to a common resource. Fish is a good example, and of course the atmosphere is another. The use of any one of you, if I looked at 100 of you and you all had access to a commons, a fish resource, every time you use that resource without reimbursing your colleagues, you take something away from them. Okay, that's an externality. You're doing stuff, it affects them, but unless a price is put on you, you can do it at no cost to yourself. You are what's called a free rider. They had a film like that, didn't they, when I was young? Do I remember that? Peter Honda? No, Peter Honda? Peter Fonda. Peter Fonda on a Honda. Yeah, okay, fine. So what's the result of that? You get a mad rush of people dashing in there, knowing that the resource is not going to last long. I'm going to get in there and get my bit quick, okay? And the resource gets depleted. And my forebears come from Scotland, west of Scotland, rather than the east. But the people in the east of Scotland can tell you all about the demise of the herring fishery, and it happened very quickly. The whole community of fishing villages up and down the east coast, and within the space of 5 years or so, they all went bang. That's the tragedy of the commons. What's the solution to that? Well, the economic solution in the 18th century was to put a fence around the commons, the enclosures movement. And the Scottish version of this was the Highland clearances. You have lovely people like the head of the Clan MacDonald. I know I'm a Campbell, but this isn't an anti-MacDonald. Sitting at an interview saying, well, actually he had this in a very English accent, I have to say, the head of the Clan MacDonald. I think the people that were sent to Canada and Australia and those places, I think it worked out pretty well for them, don't you? I think it was a good thing that my great-great-great-great-grandfather did. You're not laughing. I didn't think it was funny either, really, but there you go. So that was the solution back then, was to make a common resource a personal resource, okay? You make sure that the costs and benefits of using that resource sheet home to just one person, and they then have the incentive to do something about it. How do we enclose the atmosphere? Right. 21st century, right, this is the best you're going to get. Of all the slides, this is going to be the best, right? This should start to get you stirred up. 21st century solution, and it's the one that instinctively is given the kind of background I have professionally, that I would lean to as well. Let's get a bloody price on this damn thing. You know, and instead of allowing people to chuck it into the air for free, and we know the cost it imposes, let's get the price on there to make sure that they're reimbursing the rest of us for that. Well, the Americans have had a look at this, a multi-agency study in the US on the price required to restrict emissions to 450 parts per million, leaving us with a 2/3 chance of staying underneath 2 degrees. You remember all that rhetoric from Bob Lloyd's thing. They reckon $40 US per tonne of CO2. For us, that's about $50, okay? So they think that's about what it will take. I have no way of knowing how accurate that is, and as we'll see later on in these slides, kind of nobody knows, because we're looking at a zone of behavior which nobody has really much familiarity with. The Swedes, on the other hand, bless them, look at that. Sweden is charging $150 a tonne for CO2 emissions. Let's get into the more interesting stuff. The European Union has been running a cap and trade market for several years now. That market has got less and less effective, and currently you can buy a tonne of CO2 allowance for $5.60 a tonne, not $40. If you turn to the UN, which is the international framework, which incidentally, if you remember from the calculations that I shared with you when I was with you last, this is where New Zealand expects to buy at least half, something like 60% of its permissions to emit carbon. They want to buy them internationally. This is how much it's going to cost. Oh no, that's the response I wanted. Are you ready to get out there and hang a bishop? Not yet. Wait, there is more. 40, delete expletive, cents. I used to get into trouble for swearing, but I won't try with you guys here. Why is it so cheap? Well, because it turns out they're actually, some of this, there's a good reason for this, is that have indeed been, and there are still some very cheap ways of getting carbon out of the international emissions portfolio. Some seriously dirty coal-based power plants in Russia. You know, it makes sense to get rid of those. It doesn't cost much. You can replace them with something that's a lot cleaner, and that does produce a lot of credits internationally, which we can buy and say, fine. They've done the emissions control job for us, as it were, and we can buy the benefit of that and use it ourselves. So, you know, some of it was operating the way it was expected to, but by golly, there is no way that 40 cents is the right price, right? And some of it, of course, was just plain cheating. Now, I can't remember the specific example. There were factories actually, supposedly, opened in China in order only to get the emission credits, and whatever it was they were doing was a non-business, okay? It's just a front. But it doesn't stop there. In fact, if you look at the subsidies that national governments are giving to the oil industry, the fossil fuel industry, the coal industry, subsidies. Why are we subsidizing this stuff? Duh! You know, but if you look at that internationally and divide by the tons that are being emitted, we're actually encouraging this industry to the tune of $15 per ton of CO2 emitted. And we should be charging them $40. Right? Am I getting you stirred? Good. I keep telling you economics is dull. Discount rates. I like this. This allows me to play with numbers, which I like doing. So, ready? This is where it gets dull. Oh, no, it doesn't. Wait a minute. The first slide is one you've seen before from me. It just makes the point, if you remember this slide, that a lot of the really nasty stuff that could be coming at us is going to take a long time to arrive. You know, we could be talking a century, 2-3 centuries before things like the major ice caps really finish doing their thing. So this is a problem that's going to be with us for a very long time. How does economics try and deal with that? It's a question of looking at the relationship between value tomorrow, or if you like, cost tomorrow, same thing, just $1, you know, as against the value of something today. And just to remind you of, or if you haven't seen it before, give you a quick introduction to the rationale for all of this. If I give you $1 today, you can actually invest it in a bank someplace, you can earn interest, and you'll end up with more than $1 a year from now. So these two things are not comparable. Conversely, if I offer you $1 tomorrow, it's worth a bit less than $1 today, because in fact all I need to do is give you enough so that you can earn that interest and end up with the dollar. If an actual example would work for you, I can give you 96 cents now, and at 4%, yes, we can still sort of get 4%, just. You'll end up with nearly $1. It's 99.96 cents in future. So this is called, well, no, make a statement first. So future dollars are, the key word here is discounting, okay? Future dollars are discounted to a lower value because we are giving up the opportunity of earning some interest on them, okay? It's called time preference. We are observed empirically as human beings to have a preference for, let's have my goodies now rather than later, okay? And this magic number in the middle there, that 4%, is known as the discount rate. So the next few slides just talk about the discount rate. Let me tell you, this turned out to be a point of enormous argument. I won't even call it debate, it was vigorous argument. When Nicholas Stern came up with his first report in the mid-80s now, gosh, it's long, no, it wasn't that long ago, 10 years ago. Because he used a discount rate of 1.5%. And everybody climbed on his back, well, the loud people did anyway, and saying this is ridiculous, this is nowhere near the kind of rates that we should be using. We all know that interest rates that we have to pay and we get benefit from are more like 5, 6, 7, 8%. 1.5%? What are you talking about? That's far too low. Okay? Now, I've had conversations with, I won't name the gentleman, but he is chairman of one of the largest banks. I can't say which, kind of. One of the largest banks, and there are only 4. So anyway, he was one of those people that said 1.5% is just ridiculous. So I need to explain to you why the discount rate thing matters, and I hope the next few charts will do this smartly. There's another reason for discounting as well, and that's crucial for us when we think about climate change, is risk. And the way in which financial markets deal with risk is to play with that discount rate. They will say to themselves, well, actually, you know, I can put money in the bank and at 4% and I can get $1 if I start with 96 cents. But you're asking me to give you $1 and you're going to rush off and invest it in some harebrained scheme. I'm sorry, you've got to sweeten the deal a bit, okay? And the way in which that is done is to discount, to use a steeper discount rate to make sure, as it were, that you get your money back. You get more of your money back or you get it back quicker. So this is called a risk premium, okay? So again, this is a language that if you haven't run into before, it becomes really important when we're thinking about climate change. Climate change is risky. And the way in which financial markets deal with risk is to increase the discount rate. You comfortable so far? I don't see anybody actually nodding off yet. Have I told you my story about? No, never mind. Okay, so let's have a look at some examples here. I apologize for the different metric. I was doing this on my computer and I forgot about changing things to percentages. That's 1%, okay? 0.01, 1 out of 100, 1%, okay? So the 1% discount rate, if you look at dollars which are earned out into the future, start with 0, $1 is $1 today, go out 35 years, and I've picked that number deliberately, taking us to 2050, you'll remember that that's the kind of target year for a lot of the INDC work that's being done. The further out you go, these dollars that occur 35 years from now, I really don't have to give you much money at all, sort of something like 70 cents. I can give you 70 cents now, and even at 1% interest, you'll end up with $1 in 35 years' time. Compound interest is wonderful. The story that always brought this home for me was Paul Samuelson, the great economist and educator of my generation, that said that the North American Indians who had accepted, I think it was 3 stuffed sheep and a few barrels of something or other for the whole of Manhattan Island in kind of 60 and something or other, had they invested the monetary equivalent of that, they could have bought the whole thing back again. That's compounding for you. None of us will live long enough to really realize how powerful that is. But just try it, you know, on your spreadsheet when you get it home. Just try compounding things for 100 years. You get some big numbers. So that's 1%. Here's 3.5%. This is what the British government likes to discount its projects at. Not really from the point of view of risk this time. I mean, you know, this is British government. That's not particularly risky. They do it deliberately to discourage investment in the government sector. And I was involved in a very similar exercise when I was living in Wellington, and I was a boy a long time ago, and we had a high-ish discount rate for just that same reason. But I give you this as an example just to show you the difference between a small discount rate of 1%. Doesn't look like much, does it? 3.5 is not much of a difference, but look at the difference it makes to future dollars. And remember, it's the future costs, it's the long-range costs here that matter. And 35 years from now, we're not even starting to look at the serious stuff, okay? So all of a sudden, a 70 cents in the dollar that you can still see gets reduced to something like 30 cents in the dollar. So what happens when you add a risk premium is that you make future dollars smaller. And the way I always like to try and explain this to my darling students is that you are literally seeing less of the future, right? The future just becomes smaller. It's as if you had a pair of lenses on and you could just twiddle the numbers and the future would gradually vanish away to you. That's what 5% looks like. Again, that's not a steep discount rate. So the higher the risk premium, the less of the future you see. And there is 10%, 1 part in 10. And you see there that by the time you've got to kind of 25, 30 years, you're basically down to nothing. Now, you know, 10% interest rates, discount rates, are not unfamiliar to us, right? They have been there in recent times. And there are certainly people that would say, well, you know, if we're going to deal with this risky problem, we should deal with it with a nice stiff risk premium. This is exactly the wrong thing to do, yeah? Because what you're doing is actually you're restricting your view of the future, and it's that future that you need to see. So, in other words, this is the argument. Nicholas Stern is not alone in this, by the way. People that are good economists know that you do need a low discount rate for this kind of risk. So, yeah, we need a small number. If you start to stretch it out to 100 years, and again, that's really just the beginning of when the bad stuff might start to happen, look at it. You know, 3.5, 5, 1%, they all vanish, basically, after 40, 50 years. It's only with a very low discount rate that you keep in touch with the distant future at all, at the rate of 40 cents in the dollar. Have I convinced you? Right, so when someone comes to you and says, risk premium, this is a risky problem, we should have a higher discount rate, remember those pictures. Remember this picture, right? Because at a high discount rate, you simply won't see the future. It won't be part of the analysis. It won't have any effect on the number crunching that you do. Right. Okay. Economic models. Oh, you're going to love this bit. You're allowed to fall asleep, actually, at this stage. But I had to put this in because this is how I kind of cut my teeth in my training as an economist. General equilibrium models. I mean, even the title sends you to sleep, doesn't it? But roughly speaking, this is how they work. And you'll see these used. They are, for example, used in the government's discussion consultation paper on targets. They commissioned studies from the Institute for Economic Research and from Infometrics and from Landcare, looking at what are the likely consequences, what's the cost going to be of doing all this, okay? And a model offers an attractive way of trying to deal with those problems. So I thought I should share with you just a little bit what's actually involved in these models, just a little bit, promise. I hope it won't be too, well, it's not going to be painful because, you know, you can just go to sleep instead, can't you? So what you do is you start with, an array of information about product prices, and carbon can be one of those products. And those prices can include important prices like wages, price for labour, taxes, the price we pay for government, exchange rates, which is the price we pay for overseas goods, and even a price for capital, the investments that we need. Now, this is the bit that I got involved with, and this is kind of where I want to take you, is this little bit in here, okay? So what you then need to know is the interrelationships, the interactions between product production. So when I make a unit of, I don't know, what should we say, one of these, something like that. What else do I need to make it? I've no idea. Has anybody in the room got any idea how you make glass? Silica. Thank you. Anything else? Heat. Silica and heat. That'll do. Okay. So I'll need, yes, exactly. So I'll need a source of silica and I'll need an energy supplier somehow. So what you do is for any product that you want to make, for any of these items coming down the screen, as it were, boom, reading down here, you take each of these products. It will show you how much you need of other stuff in order to make a unit of what it is you're making. And likewise, these boxes here will tell you how much labor you need, how much government services you need. And yes, we do use those. I mean, health, that kind of thing. What about imports and exports? How much foreign goods are we going to use? How much can we sell? And then finally, how many units of capital are required? That's kind of what got me started on my PhD. See how exciting I am as a person. God, it was dull. I'm not kidding you. Yeah, it was dull. It really was dull. And the outcome of all of that is a statement of how much gets produced of each product, including carbon, how many people get employed, how big the government is, what our balance of payments is going to be, and how much investment we need. Because that sort of roughly makes sense. Yeah, you okay so far? Good, I'm doing well. Now, the way in which these models work is they optimize, another disgusting word. What they do is they will fix some part of this overall set of accounts, basically, is what they are. They will say, right, well, I'm going to assume that, or I'm going to use past data to estimate some of what's in this model. So crucially, they will come up with estimates of what was done in this particular study, come up with estimates of product prices, including carbon, and wages and taxes and exchange rates and cost. Actually, no, I need to skip those. I want to focus on the green ones. I knew I'd made a mistake at this point. So you will fix some of these items, prices here, and also cost of capital in this particular study. This is the bit that's important to us. You will fix the correlations, the coefficients of these connections between products. You will say for our glass here, it will require so much silica, always, and it just will. And it will require so much energy, and it just will. And it's been that way for 50 years, and it's still going to be that way, okay? So you're really kind of, I need to do that to make clear to you that what you're doing here is actually locking in a lot of past behaviors, right? And that's why this box here is so important to us. And then you would do similar things about the amount of labor required, amount of government, imports and exports required, capital required, blah, 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 blah. So with this particular study by Adolf Strombergen, who actually did his master's at the same time I was doing my PhD, he went on to do a PhD, he works for Informatics, a lovely man. What they did here, all the green things were fixed, okay? So they fixed that, they fixed that, they fixed that, they fixed those, and they fixed that, that, and that. And then what they did was to say, what's the best we can do, given these fixed elements, what's the best we can do in terms of output? So what's not green is black, and that's what you solve for. How you do it, I used to know once, but I've forgotten. It involves matrix algebra, which was never my strong point, I have to tell you. I'm sure there's some people in the room that can help us with this if we need to ask questions. So here's what Strombergen and Andy Reitzinger, who you and I both met, didn't we, Debs? He's at Landcare, is that right?
The agricultural...
Ag Research, yeah. Here's a study they did using the Informatics model, starting with an international carbon price. So this is looking at 2050. What's the best we could hope for using this model for New Zealand in 2050, given an international carbon price of $150 per tonne, which Andy reckons is what would be necessary at that stage. This is, 35 years hence, to keep CO2 under 450 parts per million. Emissions for agriculture are included in international efforts to keep carbon under control. That's by no means a certainty, is it? We're arguing hard at the moment to keep them out. The problem with that is, just let me as a quick diversion, if we do that, what happens is that the overall burden of getting total emissions down and under control all falls onto carbon, because you've just taken methane and nitrous oxide out of the equation, right? And they're serious generators of greenhouse gases. So if you do that, carbon has to do everything. And as a result, the price of carbon goes through the roof. It actually doubles in Andy's estimation. Instead of $150, we'd be looking at $333 by 2050, because carbon is having to do all the work of reducing emissions. So it's not a good idea. We really need to have agriculture inside the tent, besides which we need to do agriculture better. I'll say something briefly about that at the end. As a result of this, because of this high price for agricultural emissions, international prices for dairy and meat rise very substantially. Again, remember, this is 35 years hence, so a doubling of the dairy price between now and 2050 is not stupid. It's actually done moderately well just in the last few days, I gather, so that's good. And finally, in terms of model assumptions, if our emissions are more than 50% of 1990 levels, and dear Lord, they ought to be well lower than that, but, you know, we would buy emission credits. What's the result? The result is actually we do better. Right? Real gross national disposable income. Isn't that wonderful? Each one of those words actually means something, but basically it's how well off we are as a country, okay? The money that we have kept in New Zealand, not owned by other people, that we can spend. It actually grows faster than a business as usual scenario. We'd be growing at 3.6% per annum rather than 2.6 per annum. Why? Because of those high international prices for dairy and meat, and also because the price for CO2 emissions, when we buy them on the international exchange, would only be 150 instead of 333 if agriculture is kept out. Okay? So I just give you that as an example of how you can use these models to come up with estimates of what the world might look like 35 years from now, might look like. We need to move on. Are these assumptions realistic? Well, the relationships inside the model, crucially that box I want to look at, the input-output stuff, is based on past data. They're often assumed, these relationships, to stay the same, even though they're referring to zones in behavior that have never been experienced. At the moment, we have a minus $15 a tonne price for carbon. Is our management of carbon going to look at all like what's going to happen when it's $150 a tonne, right? You're making some pretty heroic assumptions there. The world will change, people's behaviours will change. But very often these models will make that kind of assumption. In other words, the relationships inside are often linear, not always, but a lot of them are. And crucially here, this point, typically, no allowance is made for technical and operational improvements. That box that I want to have a look at, that I suppose, in the case of glass, it's always going to be silica and energy, I guess. I don't know, I'm an economist, I mean, you know. But there are many other products where new technologies can be used, new efficiencies can be gained, et cetera, and none of that is captured in these studies. These next two slides, these are ones I want to shock you with. I'm using them here just to make the point that we do have to go a long way from where we are now, okay? This is the OECD's report, Vintage 2013. I could also refer you to the International Energy Agency, where we actually look worse than here. But let's just pick this one. And so these are some of the metrics that we should be worrying about. The greenhouse gas emissions per capita, greenhouse gas emissions per unit of gross domestic product, number of cars per 100 inhabitants, motor vehicles per 100 inhabitants. Who's the highest? Well, the Aussies are doing a good job. The Americans are doing a good job on private cars. Who's number one in total vehicles? We are! You felt good about being a Kiwi? Go home, eat dust, and crawl on my belly. How does it go? John Knox would do this much better than I. Something like that, right? The lowest, and this is just, the high-low is there just to tell us that, you know, you can live differently. Chile gets along on 5 tons of emissions per capita and per unit of GNP. Turkey is just a fraction of the size of private cars. And ditto for motor vehicles. I asked you a question last time I was with you that said, why is it that it's our generation that worries about this stuff? Debbie, bless her, rushed off and got the data and called, you know, the result of that, as you'll remember, is that I'm wrong, right? That it's young women between the ages of 25 and 29 that are the real. However, I'm going to stick with my proposition anyway. Why is that? And it just occurred to me, thinking about today's session, you and I all remember a world that is, in fact, very different from the world we live in now. We remember a world when there were a lot less cars. I remember first time I came to New Zealand, it was on a 707, smaller than the planes we used to get to Auckland. And we had to stop in Tahiti. And we landed in a bloody thunderstorm and everybody cheered because we survived. You know, it was fun. Pan Am was still flying the Pacific. Those were the days. And in fact, actually, I'm sure a lot of you did your first OE on a boat. Yeah? Yeah. So I suspect maybe one of the reasons why we can be confronted with the horrors of, I'm sure many of you were in the room with Jeffrey Palmer a couple of days ago, this abyss that he talked about, you know, the horrors that might await us. I'm sure many of us can face that because we know that actually it's perfectly possible to have a comfortable life without all the stuff that we've got now. Lots of nodding heads. Same nodding head as before. I'm doing well. Okay. What about taxes? Now, this is, you know, what's our government doing about all this? It's always nice to kick the government, isn't it? Percentage tax on unleaded petrol. Netherlands whacks a hefty 60% on. We're not bad here, actually, at 40%. Look at the Americans. I remember living in North America way back, one of the early periods of energy concern, when the Arabs were doubling the price of oil and doubling it again. And the Texans were driving around with a big bumper sticker at the back of a big truck that said, "Drive at 90, freeze a Yankee." Yes, exactly, that's right. You've got to love Texans, they're nice people. Percent tax on diesel, Switzerland. We are actually the lowest here, okay? We're using that to encourage. One of the effects of that, of course, is that previous slide of having the largest number of vehicles of anywhere on the planet. These thundering great trucks that go up and down from Dunedin to Christchurch, you know, let's make it easy for them, you know? Percentage gas on tax, percentage, yeah, etc. Okay, so the point is that in terms of policy initiatives, we're not doing too bad on petrol, but we could be a lot more stringent. And notice, by way of comparison, how big the tax is on tobacco. And, you know, fossil fuel always reminds me of the tobacco problem, right? I quit smoking. You've quit smoking. Of course you have. I don't see anyone rushing for the doors. That took a few decades, did it not? And by golly, the tobacco companies are still fighting it every bloody inch of the way. We're going to have the same fight on our hands with the fossil fuel people. Okay. New systems unpredictable from the old. How am I doing? 0. I've finished. Well, I haven't actually, so let's just charge ahead. Well, I'll just very quickly look at this. Instead of trying to model this stuff with all of the difficulties attached to it, I find it a lot more helpful just to take a helicopter view at some of the big numbers. And these are interesting. This is the dollar value of our exports to the rest of the world by products, the top 10. Look at dairy. Right, now admittedly this is before the price collapse, but dairy is out there all by itself. Then comes meat, sheep, and not a lot, right? Okay. Next graph is who we selling the stuff to. Look at China. I had no idea that China was so big in terms of proportion of our exports to the rest of the world. Put the two things together and you look at the destination of our top 10 products, and you can factor tourism into that. And I've just put in red that China is 1, 2, or 3 in just about all of those. This reminds me very much of the way New Zealand was when I first came here in the mid-70s. We were an economy wedded to the UK and selling a very narrow tranche of products, sheep, yeah, and wool. And we all know what happened when the Brits joined the European Union. That came under enormous stress. We're in the same boat now. We are a highly specialised, vulnerable economy. I've got to get to the last bit. Would you allow me another 5? Yes. 2. They say 5. Question? Yes, I know, right? Okay, we're going to skip this bit. Okay, this is the last bit. New orders emerge bottom up. One could talk about infant industries. One could talk about research and development. I don't want to do that. I want to talk about Dunedin. This is where I want you to get out there and hang a bishop. Not my bishop, I have to say. Kelvin Wright, who is the Anglican Bishop of Dunedin, is a lovely, lovely man. Many of you will know him. He's been an important person in my life for a long time. Leave him alone. And the other one, the Catholic one's called Colin Campbell, so you're not going to touch him either. So, as it happens. Anyway, but I do want you to get bottom up. And this is the way new orders emerge. We are precisely where the new stuff will emerge. Debbie's message to you was, don't think you're powerless as a consumer. Buy the New Zealand orange, not the Australian one or the Californian one. I want to say here that we here in New Zealand, in Dunedin, are exactly where it's at. This is where the new world should begin, here today with us. Am I sounding like John Knox yet? I'm trying. Okay, first of all, we know this stuff is hurting us. You know, some of you will live in South Dunedin, and you know that you're only 40 centimetres above the water table. And you know it's going to rise by maybe up to a metre by the end of the century. Your house is going to last that long. I hate to raise the subject, you probably agonise about it already, but, you know, insurance. The international insurers are onto all of this stuff. If it isn't hard already, it's going to get harder to get insurance for these places. I was pleased, in a sense pleased, to see that the nice people in Sumner in Christchurch are facing the exact same problem. Why is that good news? Well, because they're mostly national voters. No, I mean, my point here is that, you know, a lot of the guys living in South Dunedin wouldn't be. They'd be on the other side of the political. What we need here is a cross-party commitment to doing something about this. We shouldn't be playing party politics with this. We should have a concerted effort that spans both sides. And I'm given hope in that by the nice people in Sumner facing the same challenges that we face in South Dunedin. Aha! Aha! Here we get to it. Now, what is the economic sense of encouraging offshore drilling for oil and gas? Here's how it works, folks. This is a study from Burl that was commissioned by our city council, bless them, just 3 years ago. You spend the first 3 years, and this is what they're doing now from 2013 to 2015, in exploration. If you find something, you spend another couple of years appraising what you found. You then spend another year and 18 months developing what you found, and then you're in production. If you're producing oil, that will last for 15 years, but they're not looking for oil, they're looking for gas. And that will last for 35 years. That's what Burl says, right? Now, I've deliberately put that time scale on top of the chart that I shared with you last time, which is the risk of going beyond 2 degrees. Now, you know, just come back a couple of points here, there. By the time we get to 2020, we'll be looking at a 1 chance in 4 of going beyond 2 degrees. If we stop then, no more units of carbon dioxide emitted at all. That's not going to happen, is it? All right? So by 2020, when they're ready to start pumping the stuff, we're already in very dangerous water. Whoops, I'm going the wrong way. And certainly for the life of a gas field, if that were to last for 35 years, I mean, this is just ridiculous. Nobody in their right mind should be investing in this, okay? And we certainly shouldn't. This industry has no future. Why would Dunedin want to hitch its wagon to that, okay? Why not, instead, electric cars? They were mentioned. Electric trams and cable cars, why not? I know you think that's a step into the past. Go to Zurich. Yeah? That's what you've got there. They're wonderful. You just step onto them and they take you anywhere you want to go. Eastern Europe's full of these things. This is my favourite. This is my idea. Electrify the main trunk line. You'd need 2 lines, by the way. With IT-intensive, 24/7, what's called empty floor logistics. In other words, your local truck from Mosgiel drops off a product. It's on a train within, should we say, 2 hours. It's in Christchurch within 6 or 7, okay? With absolute certainty. 24 hours a day, boom, and it's all driven by hydroelectric power. Organic low-emission agriculture, it's possible, okay? And how about using Invame, right, to lead the charge on that? And they could do it. They could do it. Well, you know, these aren't stupid ideas. All this can happen. Cycling corridors. I don't get on a bike. It's too damn cold in Dunedin. But then my daughter spent 6 months in Copenhagen. So what do you mean? It's freezing in Copenhagen. It's much nicer here. Get a bike. What about the hills, I said? Well, get a lift, you know. I mean, a lift for the bike. Yeah, why not? You know, you've got to think outside the square. The new world is going to be different from the one we know, and that's the fun, okay? And the other thing that one can foresee happening is that as the cost of transportation, CO2-based transportation increases, what we could well see is a return to industries to Dunedin who left 50 years ago to go north, it won't make as much economic sense anymore for them to be too far away from their markets. Finally, Stephen, really, I still have them with me. They're not going to sleep yet. So finally, it costs too much to change. This is the rhetoric we hear. If you were there with Geoffrey Palmer, he said the same. I know his heart's in the right place. I was sorely tempted to get up and say something about it, but this is what I want to share with you. I figured to myself at the time, I'm going to have, out of the 500 people listening to Geoffrey Palmer, I'm going to get 100 of them on Wednesday, so that'll do. Yes, it's going to cost you, and it's going to cost you heaps if you are an owner of fossil fuel assets. If you're an oil company, yeah, this is going to cost you a bucket. It's called a stranded asset. You have a whole refineries. What are we going to do in the Marsden refinery? I don't know. Make silica out of it or something, and if you have an industry that relies heavily, as dairy does, by the way, how do you get milk powder? You use coal in the South Island here, and you use gas in the North Island to dry it from milk. So dairy is a highly carbon-intensive industry. That's, it's a risky industry also. They need to be thinking about what they're doing. So yes, those kind of industries will face costs. Yes, my loves, for those of you that have property in South Dunedin, or elegant beach patches, someplace, anywhere, and if it's real close to the sea, yes, it's a problem. There are ways of dealing with that. Us taxpayers may well want to recompense you for your loss. I'm not sure I want my tax dollars recompensing the oil companies for their loss. They know this stuff is coming. They know more about this stuff than any of us, and yet they're still doing it. I've got no interest in helping their economic costs. But if you invest in the carbon-free industries of the future, you are going to have fun. This is what happens. This is, economies have reinvented themselves many times over, and that's where the serious money is made. Ask Bill Gates. What was computing about as an industry before that little chap came along? And look at him now, right? So there's serious money to be made out of these transitions. That's where the funds should go. And I love this quote from Brian Arthur, who's an economist of sorts. Rewards go to the players who are the first to make sense of the new games looming out of the technological fog. So get out there, and anybody that tells you that we should be putting money into war, I know why they're doing it. Jobs now is nice, time preference, okay? But heavens, let's have a look out even 20 years, and it just doesn't make sense, right? Get out there, hang a bishop.